Welcome into the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network, sponsored by Bet Rivers Sportsbook. That is Christian Hackenberg. He's got the hat rolled up. I know the weather's starting to get a little bit chilly. It is November in the Big Ten. I'm merely Joshua Perry. We got a great show coming at you, but I was telling Hack before we jumped on here, we got a little bit of snow yesterday here in the city of Chicago, and I have yet to put on the thick winter coat because I had mentioned before, I don't want to put on the layers too early. You got to let your body acclimate to when the temperature first dips, because if you put on the layers entirely too early, once January and February come around and it starts dipping below zero, you're fucked totally.
Yeah, you're going to pay for it. There's definitely a ramp up period. It's like anything, you can't just jump into doing the conditioning test. You need all summer to get yourself right. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, philosophically, this is my summer conditioning before the test comes in January and February. So I like that. I like that.
Paint the picture for the folks. There we go.
Yeah,
I like
you're
it.
True media type these days, man.
I'm
proud of you. All right. Like I said, some action from over the weekend. I wouldn't say it was the craziest weekend necessarily. Now, the Big Ten West is totally crazy, and we had talked about the potential for that situation. I'll dive into the current scenarios and what needs to happen over there. I will say this is I'm not very smart, and somebody a lot smarter than me gave me these scenarios. So I can't tell you what happens if past the scenarios I currently have to share with the people. That's nuts. The East is pretty much sorted out. It is Ohio State and Michigan neck and neck. And then there's a clear third team in the conference, I believe, has separated themselves and is not close. And that's Penn State. And, they beat Maryland 30-0. We're not going to recap that game, but I just wanted to give you the floor simply before we get into the scores and everything else to talk about that team. Because my question is this. It's a pretty clear Penn State is firmly that number 3 team in the conference. It's going to be a 10-win regular season. Penn State's going to finish off the regular season a top 10 football team. The issue has been, though, that when you're getting to those AP top 10 opponents, Penn State has struggled. So if you are a fan of the Nittany Lions, how do you reconcile with the fact that a 10-win regular season, New Year's Six bowl game is in line? Like I said, top 10 team, like recruiting's going well. The young guys look good this year, but you still didn't beat Ohio State, Michigan. How do you reconcile with that?
Yeah, I think it's tough. And a point to touch on that you and I've touched on in previous shows, and I just want to continue to hammer home, is that to me, Penn State was the first one to topple the giant in Ohio State consistently in the Big Ten championship, getting there, representing the East. They did it before Michigan. And to me, Penn State failed to carry that momentum on at that level where it was Penn State and Ohio State. And then they're talking about Michigan as the third tier, right? Michigan made the leap, and Penn State now has to do something to differentiate themselves and try to make a push to really become in the conversation with those two giants again, right? Not for a lack of talent, I think maybe building cycles, all these things. And it's funny because you saw this year, you saw two different teams show up against both these teams, and it's two different fighting styles, and those things make the fights, as George Whitfield likes to say. But
for sure,
built more to compete with Ohio State, much more competitive game against Ohio State. Michigan's going retro, and they came out and steamrolled Penn State. So it's really interesting to see the way Coach Franklin's building the program. I think obviously for the youth that we've had and the glimpses that we've seen, it's very exciting to be a Penn State fan. But I think the biggest hurdle for us, reconcile it, deal with the two losses, however you want to deal with it. They're both top 4 football teams in the country, and they have been all year. So again, two different types of losses, but 2 losses nonetheless to really good football teams that are highly regarded across the country. And I think the way you get over this hurdle is get into one of these New Year's Six games. You're going to get a great opponent, whether it be a Pac-12 opponent, possibly another SEC opponent. You got to win. You can't put a showing on like you did against Arkansas last year. You have to win this one and really send the momentum heading into winter workouts, heading into spring ball in the right direction. And I think that's going to motivate a lot of these younger guys to start competing. Obviously, there's going to be some holes filled at both Michigan and Ohio State, some question marks at some key positions. So
Yep.
it's a great chance for Penn State, who's been kind of grooming their quarterback slowly but surely, and something I've been very complimentary of. It's a great chance for Penn State to have a ton of momentum heading into next year, but they got to get it done. They got to get it done in the big bowl game. And it's going to be, like you said, against the favorable top 10 matchup. And that's something Coach Franklin's got to prove to everybody.
No doubt. No doubt. And I love the way you sum that up. I think it's going to be encouraging for Penn State fans. And you mentioned the youth, I mentioned the youth, but I just want to reiterate for everybody, like a lot of contributors that are young guys on the football team. We know the two running backs. We talked about Drew Aller at quarterback. On the defensive side of the ball, there have been some great contributions. And when I look at Ohio State, for example, going to be a big conversation this offseason about who's taking snaps. And Ohio State's been able to reload at the quarterback position. So people feel confident, but it's not a guarantee that whoever steps in there is going to be, you know, a Heisman Trophy candidate by the end of the year. You know,
super interesting too, because you've seen flashes with Kyle McCord, right? And I've talked about the kid, obviously really talented, came out of South Jersey area, played. He's a really good football player, and we've gotten to see him play really well. But that's the interesting part, because like you look at big picture, you look at DJ down at Clemson, and we got to see him throw for 450 yards in South Bend, and everyone was really excited. And then when he got the chance to take over the reins, it just really didn't click. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors that go into it, but that's something to pay attention to, right? You don't have a kid who's getting consistent snaps like Ohio State has in the past with their backup guys, third, fourth quarters. You know, you've seen CJ play full games here pretty consistently throughout his career. So really interesting to pay attention to that and see how he adjusts. And that's why I said, I think that's the difference between Penn State. They're grooming their young guy, getting him chances. He's appeared in almost every game this year. So, big difference.
He's getting valuable reps. And that is the one thing I worry about with Kyle McCord. And I've got a lot of respect for the kid, because he's been patient in a day and age where kids do not do that. So I think he's cut from a different cloth. The talent certainly is there, but that's the one thing, is you cannot manufacture game reps. It's not something that you can just, we did a practice drill. It's like, but it's so different than actually being in the game. You know this as well as anybody, especially at the quarterback position.
It's impossible to manufacture it. The only way you get it is getting it in the chin and live bullets. That's it.
Live bullets, baby. That is it. All right. Go through some of these scores, recap a couple games, and get on some storylines. But Purdue victorious over Illinois. Score of that one, 31-24. This one's going to be one of our recappers. I know you're rolling your eyes. We won't get started with the Purdue slander praise quite yet. It's some slander. It's a lot of praise.
So confusing.
It's very confusing. And we have a Purdue Boilermaker fan who listens to this show, and we interact on Twitter. So I know they're looking forward to this recap. It's going to be a good one, because they have shared their frustrations and the roller coaster that they live on as a Purdue fan. So we're on the same roller coaster there with you. Michigan State got another win, 27-21 over Rutgers. They're one win away from bowl eligibility, with Indiana and Penn State still in their schedule. Seems like Mel Tucker figured out a way to rally the troops and get this thing turned around. Give that man a ton of credit for that. Ohio State blew out Indiana 56-14. Iowa beats Wisconsin 24-10. Interesting score there. Michigan 34, Nebraska 3. It was a very typical Michigan nasty weather, grind them out, suffocate them performance. We'll get into it. This team, man, and that identity that they have, it's not sexy football, bro, but it's good football.
Yep. Old school.
It is.
Throwback.
Minnesota.
Shall I say.
It is a throwback. Yes. This is like, short shorts and polos for the coaches with the tube socks throwback type stuff.
Yes.
Minnesota over Northwestern 31-3, and then Penn State, man, looking good. I mean, it has been a steady and we talked about them, but 30-0 over Maryland. And I thought that this Maryland team was going to be able to compete a lot better than that. They've been uncharacteristic these last couple of weeks, but Penn State really made them look like a bad football team.
It's suffocating.
Yeah.
suffocating.
Yeah.
That defense has really stepped up, but that's something
You
we
know, I
talked
love
about.
that defense. I've been talking
Yeah.
about them all year. I think the world of those guys. And Manny Diaz, man, he's done a hell of a job.
Yep. Yep. Good little
All right.
reset button for him.
It's a
Good
great
little reset button for him. You come in
Great
there,
little.
you get the
Well,
reins to a great defense that's traditionally played really well. A lot of talent. It's good.
so James Franklin, I think, deserves a lot of credit for the self-awareness, because I don't think the Manny Diaz coordinator thing would have worked in other places if you didn't have more of a CEO type guy. Because Diaz, a former head coach, and if you've ever been around him, he is like, he does the things that he wants to do and the things that he knows to be great. And he's taken over a side of the ball that already had an infrastructure, and James wasn't trying to do too much with them anyway. I think just from how they work in the back room and the meetings and on game day and everything, like, it all just made sense, and it's come together for both of those guys.
It's the most consistent side of the ball for Penn State in terms of coaching staff that they've had with Brent Pry there. I mean, Pry was there when Coach Franklin got there. He was a linebackers coach. Shoop was there, so took over, did a great job. He's gonna do a damn good job down at Tech, but it was the most consistent job, and it's one of the sides of the ball that I think Coach Franklin really just was like, yeah, like to your point, stayed out of it, let him handle it, and it allowed Manny to step into it. Very unique situation. That's a very astute point for all the folks out there listening. Joshua Perry coming from a defensive guy, dropping some knowledge on you that you may have overlooked. The situation is sometimes more important than anything else. So
don't you try to butter me up, hack. Don't you do that.
I have to after you folded and got the Christmas tree up before Thanksgiving. And I know it was your anniversary yesterday, 2 years. Happy anniversary. A little bit late, but you folded, man. So I gotta butter you up, get you back on your high horse.
Folded like a lawn chair, man. I'm pissed off. All right, here we go. Let's talk football. Purdue. They beat Illinois. This was the show up and play ball Purdue team that we know is good. I think the most important stat in this game is Illinois was penalized 12 times for 121 yards. It's an egregious number. But we talk about the penalties and
touchdown.
Sometimes that's a touchdown. I mean, you can directly say that the game would be different if the penalty yards weren't that high. But it's interesting because Urban Meyer ran a study when he was coaching at Ohio State about how much penalties actually affect the football game. And what he realized is that some of the best football teams in the country are highly penalized teams because, they challenge in the secondary, their guys are aggressive. So you might get a hold, you might get a little bit of a late hit, those types of things. So the penalties don't always tell the story about how much it affects the outcome. In this game, you can directly point to how this had an effect on the outcome. And Brett Bielema is one of the coaches I respect the most in all of college football because I love the way he teaches. I think he is a great teacher. So this, to me, is so uncharacteristic. And now we're looking at this Illinois team for a couple of weeks in a row. They have not looked like the team that we all fell in love with. And this is not a question or a challenge on the program because you can look in either one of those games and say, no, it wasn't their best game. Did they absolutely get housed? No. But you start to ask the question, was it too much too quickly? Because sometimes you see that. This is a roster that was exceeding expectations just from a talent standpoint, from a where they're supposed to be right now standpoint. And it felt like you kind of get to that later part of the year, man, and you hit a wall a little bit. You run the piss out of your running back, and your quarterback's been doing everything he can. Haven't really stretched the football field. Like, that's the question that I start to wonder about with this team.
Yeah, two points here. I think when Coach Meyer did that study, obviously, I think you're dealing with two different animals when you're talking about the best of the best and being able to overcome penalties and putting themselves in bad situations in a roster. And this is not a knock on the kids at Illinois, but
it's not.
It's been their MO. They've been very, very disciplined. They've played within themselves. They've played within the schemes. They've been put in really good situations, right? It's tough for that team to overcome those, whereas a team like Ohio State or a team like Georgia or even a team like Alabama who has just Tarzans walking around all over the place, they can overcome those things, right? They could take one in the chin and know that they're going to get their licks back. This Illinois team prides themselves on consistency and discipline. And when that's kind of your foundation as a team and that happens, that's going to lose you ball games. It's going to lose you ball games. And I think you brought up another great point. I think this whole team wore down, and it's a battle of attrition at this point. And you see the best teams in the country really start peaking middle of the year, end of the year. They're running full speed, and they're running through teams that they should run through. It has a lot to do with depth, has a lot to do with contributors. When you have a guy like Chase Brown who shouldered so much, I'd love to see the breakdown statistically of how much offense he's accounted for this Illinois team throughout the year. It's probably insane.
That'll be a project. I'll try to get that number. Just make sure you text me, but I'll try to get that number for us next week.
But it's a very astute point. You can't have a 22-year-old kid shoulder that load while going to class, not having the chance to take care of his body to the way that he probably should and or wishes he could. There's a lot of elements that go into college football. So I think it's just kind of that battle of attrition of very, very good team making a turn, making some waves in the recruiting world. I saw some stuff, getting some flipped commits coming into Illinois. I think that's going to be a big thing for Illinois, but building a strong, tough, deep roster, I think, is his next step because he has some great pieces that are going to be there for the next couple of years, or at least the foreseeable future. So good start, battle of attrition, sucks.
Yes.
And then flipping it over to Purdue, man, like, this is the team that we thought they could be. And we've talked about it at length. We talked about how, heading into it, if they had a great showing against Penn State opener on Thursday night, it's just so frustrating watching these guys. And this, I can't even go on. It's so frustrating watching these guys because you want to pull for them. And I love Aiden O'Connell. I'm so in on Aiden O'Connell. It's not even funny. I have been all year. I think he's going to play football for a really long time. As long as he wants to, but it's just so frustrating to see the valleys and peaks of this football team. And this is going to be a year where they look back at what could have been. And that's the worst feeling ever.
That's exactly what they're going to do. And, I was joking with Jake Butt about this in terms of this Purdue team, but like, it's the one that Ohio State and Michigan don't want to see in Indy because it's the team that you don't know what the hell you're going to get out of them.
They're the most unpredictable one on the West.
Gives you the most pause in terms of can they pull off the upset, because we have seen them so wildly inconsistent. I mean, I go back, and again, like, Penn State is a top 10 team in the country, in my opinion, by the end of the year. And these cats were down to the wire with them. Yep. Right. So like, that's the thought that you get, is they can hang in there with a team like that. It's absolutely wild, but we don't get to see that all the time. Wanted to go through just a couple of stats that stood out to me in this game. So DeVito was 56% tossing the ball. He's averaging over 70%. So totally uncharacteristic. And part of that was the backed up situations that they were in with the penalties. Chase Brown was held under 100 yards and he was knocked out of that game. Would love to say this is I've appreciated the way that guy has played. I have gotten some behind the scenes on how he works. I hope that the injury wasn't too serious, that they can get him back soon, because he is the heart and soul of that football team. Then the defense, I think, for Illinois was super on edge because Purdue wanted to run the football. And so it keeps, especially with that offense, because they run it to set up the pass. That's a secondary that I love. And they were challenged. And so they were losing a lot of the 50-50 balls that they typically win defensively. And they took the ball away. They did a good job of that. But I mean, it's a tough spot. And I ended up doing the numbers here. So Chase Brown has accounted for 36% of their total yardage this year. So a third of their offense, a little bit more than that, has gone through him. It's a huge percentage. But this, I mean, to me, I'm so unsettled by the way that Purdue has done the roller coaster thing all freaking year, man.
It's hard, like, looking forward, right? Let's take this a big picture conversation. Looking forward with the program, to me, again, you could say what you want about Aiden O'Connell, but when you turn on the tape, like, generational guy, he's won them so many big football games, even going back to last year, the Ohio State game, the game against Tennessee in the bowl game. Like, he's won them so many football games, and they've had consistency at a position where they didn't have a ton of consistency in previous years now. And that's gone after this year. right?
Yep.
So that's why I said to me, this was Purdue's year to put a bow on it and say, you know what? We've kind of been this for the past few years. We beat Ohio State, get boat raced by Northwestern. Like, it's like you go up and I'm not saying that happened, but I'm saying like over the past few years, teams of that caliber, you don't know what you're getting, right? And you think that this year's the year. They got a great quarterback. He's veteran. It's his first year where they're saying, you're the guy, all in. Here we go. Like, going into it after a really good finish to last year. Whole off season, they go and grab Charlie Jones from Iowa, right? Great playmaker. They got a great tight end room. You think this is the year where they're just going to say, all right, this is who we are. We're going to come out, play well. Great defense coming in, playing hot after a good showing last year. I think a little bit better than what was expected, but then they just couldn't do it. So as an AD, you're sitting there going, how do I evaluate this? Is this a Jimmy's and Joe's? Is this a coaching philosophy? Is this a standard within the program? So I think there's a really unique deep dive, because again, you're not at a marquee school, right? Where you're going to get the pull of the big names and the next hottest coaches, but it's a really unique situation because you don't want to make too many more changes, because they've had a few changes here in the past few years. How do you evaluate this? How do you make it better moving forward? And how do you gain some consistency? And I think that's something that this program is going to have to do a deep dive in internally during the offseason here to really reflect on this and see how they're going to move forward in the right direction. It's
interesting because I don't think there's a clear answer.
Yeah.
Like that's what I would tell you. I think it's a combination platter. Like,
yeah.
I think in a lot of places they want the personnel to be better. Of course, that goes to the head coach and can you get the guys in? But also, like, Jeff Brom's been pretty clear about what his team is and how he hates the way that they have gone out and won and lost games this year. So I think everybody is probably frustrated as we are as we watch them. So we'll get back into this Purdue thing and some of the big storylines in the West scenario that I'm going to hate running through. Wanted to recap a couple more games here. So Ohio State, big win over Indiana. I think that we expected this game to be blown out. It was not particularly close at any point in the game. Ohio State was really balanced offensively, 322 through the air, 340 running the ball. They averaged 9.1 yards per play. They averaged almost 8 yards per rush. Like, this is what we wanted to see. Can you bounce back? Can you be consistent? There was a little bit of weather in there. So for all the folks who said Ohio State's going to be checking their weather app, the narrative has been busted. And I put out a tweet thread just to talk about that too, because they really only had, in the last couple of years, one bad game in the weather is the Northwestern game. Their biggest issues to me have been, can they run it with consistency and can they stop the run? We can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
The average gain on first down for Ohio State was 11.1 yards, which is a ridiculous thing to think. Like, it's first down. They're basically getting another first down right after that. And they ran for almost 10 yards run on first downs, which is where you want to be. Like, can you keep yourself on schedule running the football? The offensive issue to me is this one. They were 1 of 7 on power rushes, which are runs of 2 yards or less to convert for a first down or a touchdown. And we saw a couple of those situations where they wanted to bring it in tight and they wanted to try to run it downhill. And Indiana had a great game plan. It's basically what everybody else has done in those exact situations. They said, screw it, we're going to bring it in tight too. And we are just going to tell our guys to penetrate. It doesn't matter where you're going, just create chaos in the pile. I think it's a great opportunity for evolution for Ohio State. CJ Stroud has shown a willingness to run it these last couple of weeks. That's where you just scoot them right there over the edge and take the free yards. I'm sure Ryan Day has a solution. The defense was lights out, and that's the story of the year for me with this Ohio State team. Is we've talked more about their offensive struggles than we have about anything on defense, and it was a totally different conversation from a year ago. But the one thing that gives me pause defensively for Ohio State is the way they defend the quarterback run. This is the only thing Indiana did with success. It was really the thing that Northwestern should have gone to more that they didn't. And I see why, because their quarterbacks are, I mean, they got 2 of those guys right now who probably won't play this week because they're banged up. All that to say, that is the one issue that puts my antennas up for Ohio State. As you evaluate this team and their performance against Indiana, albeit not a great football team that they went against, what do you make of it?
So I'll start on the offensive side of the ball and kind of work from there. So I think obviously the explosion in the run game was huge, but something that gives me pause, and I don't know how bad or how serious Mayan Williams' injury was, but Travion Henderson did not dress. They're very, very thin, right? They showed some explosion.
It's more than thin at this
Yeah,
point.
it's nuts, right?
Yeah.
I made this point last night on our show, and I'm going to hit it again here for the Big Ten folks because I think it's a valid one. Ohio State has done a great job of using the extension of the run game, receiver screens in the past years as points of it. Teams like Penn State took advantage of that, took that away, right?
Yeah.
So to me, watching Ohio State's passing game, and again, I haven't had a ton of opportunity to get like the all 22 and really break down like 3 or 4 games of them and look at this. But the one thing that I haven't seen a ton of just watching football games again from Ohio State is possession passing game. Their passing game is very vertical. A lot of outside throws, a lot of up the seams, a lot of crossers, deep crossers, posts. They're very, very vertical, and it's hard not to be with the type of burners they have. But I think when you look at the team and what they have from an injury standpoint, from what they need to be able to do to possess the football, they can't be they can't put their defense out there for 35, 40 minutes a game. They cannot do that, like, especially against the Michigan team who's going to ground and pound you for 40 minutes if you give them the opportunity.
They can't.
And then
do it.
Conversely, looking ahead, like a Georgia team is going to take big advantage of that because that's what Georgia did to Tennessee, and you saw what happened there. And Tennessee is a very similar team, I think, relatively speaking, from a weapons side on the offensive side of the ball to Ohio State. So they need to figure out a way how to get some type of possession game. And to me, it's the quick game. You don't see a lot of slant flat concepts. You don't see a lot of snag concepts. You don't see a lot of horizontal stretch, spread the ball out, let's attack zone defense concepts from this Ohio State team. You see some crossers, you see some things like that. But I think there's an element of that and the screen game internally, the running back screen game, tight end screen game. Still use the receiver screen game, but you need to augment the run game in some way, shape, or form, especially with how inconsistent it's been for them. And now compound that with the fact that your 2 big workhorses are banged up finishing the year. So you really, to go into this Michigan game and do what you need to do, I think that's a big point of emphasis for Ohio State. And it should be, especially with the weapons they have outside. If they happen to get Jackson Smith and Jigba back, I don't know what that status is. That's a huge thing. Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously speaks for itself. There's a few other guys in there, Julian Fleming. They got players, right? You need to figure out a way to augment it. Conversely, flip that to the defensive side. I watched, that's the one side of the ball I made sure this weekend watching this game. Obviously, it's Indiana. It's not a great, not necessarily the best thing, but I wanted to watch their defense. I think Eichenberg's done a fantastic job of kind of driving the train at linebacker. He's awesome.
My God.
And the defensive front has been getting better and better and better. That is going to be their bell cow. If they can continue to do what they do. And to your point, you brought some great insight the last time we talked about how they're kind of living and dying. They're like, we can give up 7 explosives, but we're still going to get ours. If they can start limiting those explosives and still get theirs against these big dogs, that's going to be big. And I think that's going to come with consistency and confidence on the defensive side of the ball that they've been gaining here down the stretch. So this Ohio State team is very, very still, I think, one of the teams that can contend and really push Georgia and give them problems. But I think they need to solve a few of these little issues here that could end up, these little hairline fractures that could end up being big fractures if they don't get it fixed quick and put some stuff on tape that teams have to prepare for.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. And it's like, it's such a double edge because I'm trying to get used to living in this world of the aggression out of the defense. And like, they are totally okay with saying that we know we can get 4 sacks and 10 TFLs in a game, and we might give up a 44-yarder over our head. They they literally don't care because they believe more times than not, they are going to create the negative plays that change the game. And up to this point, they have proven that that's exactly what they'll do. I mean, leaps and bounds, they're much better. The scoring defense, the yards per game, like all of that stuff. So it's so unnerving to watch because you're like, man, like you wish it never went over their head, but it's the same concept that gets them those crazy negative plays. Going back to the offense, the point that you made about the screen game and what they need to do, I'm totally on board with. And I believe Ryan Day has a package that is ready to roll because we've seen a couple of tight end screens now. They have put wide receivers in the backfield and they've run swing passes to them. And they've tried to get the football on edges against Penn State. Awful matchup because that secondary is so physical. They eliminated all those plays. And so I believe that this is an Ohio State team that needs to get better blocking on the edges. Like they need to hold up out there. But Ryan he's sprinkled just enough to make us believe that there's a full package he's ready to unleash. The question is, when do you do it? Number two, when you do it, can you execute it properly?
Right. And that's where I said, I think just the basic, go back to the quick game, 3-step, like very rarely do you see CJ, he's dropping back, he's working off action, or he's kicking those things out, right? You very rarely see he's getting pressure. Like another way to augment that outside of the screen game to me is possession, quick passing game, right? And oftentimes they're seeing zone. Not a lot of teams are saying, hey, we're going to come out man up against Ohio State. So with those zones, you can attack that from a horizontal stretch, right? What I mean by horizontal stretch is you put bodies in the gaps of the zone defense and force people to make decisions, right? And you do it in a manner where 5-8 yards tops, and you will allow CJ to catch, throw, get the ball out there in space and allow your receivers to get yacked because you have special guys, right? I think it's a way where they can now start augmenting that, take the pressure off of CJ from having to drop back and throw the vertical passing game so much. And I think it's only going to help set up a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. for explosives then off of that, where you can run slants and then you go slant and go, because he's a very, very talented craftsman, for lack of a better term, at the position, mature beyond his years in terms of that. So that's a whole nother element of the game that I think they can start dabbling in more often and start, like I said, augmenting that run game, because it's something they put an emphasis on. And we've talked about that. They've emphasized running the football this year more so than they have in previous years. But again, injuries is something to really pay attention to. And you got to figure out ways to balance it out.
I'm totally there with you. And it'll be, I mean, this last stretch run for them, obviously they got Maryland, but Michigan game is what everybody's looking toward. They're going to have to be all hands on deck in terms of their play diversity, in terms of the play calling, and then actually the players that are available in the execution to get it done.
And CJ Stroud running the football too. CJ Stroud running the football, like you said,
and he looks like a willing participant now. And it's changed my whole perspective on him as a player. His stock is rising, and I don't know if we were going to say that at this point in the year because it was already so high, but that's important. Before we get off of this game, I just wanted to make mention of Cameron Babb. He had a touchdown late in the game. It was his first career reception. It was his first career touchdown. This is a guy who has endured 4 ACL tears, and he's been a multi-time captain at The Ohio State University. He's a guy who's wearing the Block O jersey. It's the number 0, but it signifies like the leader of their program. And I'll say this much on it. If it was me, I wouldn't have been out there. I would not have endured what he has gone through. I would not have weathered that storm to be in that situation. And I thought that Gus and Joel on the game broadcast did a phenomenal job of really celebrating that moment and letting people know why that was such a big deal. I think that people around college football have also done a great job of telling that story. And this is why we love the sport. And this is why we talk about it so much, is outside of the X's and O's, these things happen. But I just wanted to lob it up to you. When you saw that moment, what did that make you feel?
Well, like you said, you touched on it. And the biggest thing for me was watching his teammates' reaction, right? Yeah. Like you're looking at a bunch of guys who oftentimes when you're in that situation and you're in the training room, you feel very isolated. You're not lifting with the team. So he obviously found a way to still touch people on a consistent basis, which is really hard to do in that position. And you and I can talk about this because we've been there. We've been in that locker room setting. And to see the reaction of his teammates, to me, like you hit on all the great points, but to me, the reaction of his teammates said it all. And as a guy who's been in a locker room, seen people endure those types of things, watch people do some pretty incredible things while hurt, injured, bouncing back, whatever. Utmost respect for a guy like that, to your point. Like, I don't know if I could have weathered those storms either. And that's where, for him, great moment, great college football moment. And again, was really cool to see the way his teammates reacted.
Totally there. It's special, man. And again, it's the reason why we tune into games every Saturday. It's like you cannot replicate what college football gives you. So that's awesome. Last recapper, we're going to talk Michigan here. and we have to, because this is a phenomenal football team, man. Like I'm impressed by a lot of things that they do week in and week out. And what I've gotten to is Ohio State is a very good football team that has some obvious flaws. Michigan is a very good football team that has some obvious flaws, and they're getting ready to clash in a couple of weeks. And you've got two of the great game day coaches in college football. You have coordinators that are phenomenal adjusters, really good at giving their guys coaching points. And I want to see how this chess match plays out, but let's get into the game that they played against Nebraska. Mentioned the score earlier, 34-3. And this was Michigan in their bag, typically the way that they play a game. The defense, absolutely suffocating. And these guys, watching them week in and week out, has been so impressive to me, especially with what they were a year ago and what they lost. And then you go through all of the names, Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, Dax Hill, all first-round talents. And then Josh Ross on that defense. I believe he led the team in tackles last year from the linebacker spot. Not a guy who people talk about enough, in my opinion, because of the leadership that he brought to that defense. They had to replace all of that. And I mean, it looks like they haven't missed anything. And you can make the argument that this defense is significantly better than the defense that they had a year ago. And that's not a knock on those guys. It is praise to what they're doing this year. They held Nebraska to 50% completion on the day. They would not allow Nebraska to run the damn ball. And that is impressive to me as well. And then you flip it over to the offense. Blake Corum, I mean, the guy is putting together his Heisman resume right now. He ran for 162 yards on 28 attempts. He averaged almost 6 yards a carry. And he did that with just a long of 12 on the day. So it was just consistent haymakers that he was throwing to the defense. This is where you start to dig into the flaws of this Michigan team, though. And I don't want to spend entirely too much on them because they're very few and far between. But you go back to these power rushes I talked about, the runs of 2 yards or less that convert for a first down or a touchdown. They were 1 of 10. And for a team that is a mash them off the ball, downhill run team, that's a number that they certainly need to improve on. And then you look at the downfield passing game. JJ McCarthy struggled once again. He was only 40% completion on the day. And the ball was wet. Like, you give them a little bit of a pass for that, but you never know what the weather is going to be, especially late in the year in the Big Ten. And he struggled to get the ball down the field. It's something that we're all looking at right now. They had 3 big passes of 15 or more. I know at least one of them was a catch and run, though. And that's where they've come with some of their more explosives. But just in terms of air yards and connecting downfield, it's something that hasn't happened for them. As you evaluate this team and where they're going to be in a couple of weeks when they meet with Ohio State and Columbus, where are you at on these guys? Do you think that their positives, which there are so many, are enough to win them a football game? And I'm not just talking about that one. I'm talking about Michigan as a team that could win a national title this year. Is the way that they're constructed and the way that they play football, specifically offensively, enough to get them there?
Well, I think they are built very similarly to how they were last year, right? And that was enough. And I think the move to JJ McCarthy was the piece that Coach Harbaugh and the staff thought was the difference for whatever reason, however they evaluated. I think that was where they thought they could have improved and put themselves in that situation. But again, to me, it's a little bit of the same song and dance. And I think even Cade proved that he could go out and win games last year for Michigan in certain situations where JJ has not had to prove that yet. And that, to me, and it's not a knock on the kid, obviously very, very super talented. They obviously have players on the outside. Ronnie Bell, they got a great tight end room. They've got guys outside that they can get the football to and stretch the field, but they just haven't had to do it. And to me, that's the biggest question mark. When you don't have to do that in nut cutting time, 3rd and 7s consistently, 3rd and 8s consistently, deliver the ball to your 2nd and 3rd progression, get through it, buzz through it, throw it with conviction. He doesn't have a problem throwing it with conviction, but getting to those things, because that's what these teams that you're talking about winning a national championship, these top 4 teams do to you. They take away 1, they take away 2, they try to get you to have to get to these other options. And when you haven't had to do that, and you have to do that in a setting like that where the lights are bright, it's tough. And to me, when you look at Michigan and compare them to the other 4 teams, possibly 5, 6 teams that may be in the race here at the end of it, that position and the lack of having to perform in that situation is what separates it. It's not that if you roll JJ McCarthy out there and line them up side by side with all these other quarterbacks that we're talking about on these other programs, the Stetson Bennett's, the Hendon Hookers, the CJ Strouds, he could throw it with all of them better than a lot of them. Even Max Duggan at TCU, kid's been through it all. He's a warrior, right? He's shouldered the load on multiple games for that team.
He really has.
To me, that is how you win national championships. To me, that's how you make the next step. And again, they just quite haven't had to put JJ in that position. And it's hard to knock it because they've done everything they needed to do on the other side of the ball and running the football and other ways to not have to ever be in that situation. But I think it's an hourglass, right? You turn that thing over, eventually that sand's going to run out and that's going to have to come up. And that's my only hesitation with this Michigan football team. And it's something that I've been very, very consistent with and very, very confident in, is that JJ McCarthy is going to have to win them a really, really big football game solely by himself at some point in time this year. And all these other quarterbacks have done that. You've watched Stetson Bennett do it. You've watched CJ Stroud do it. You've watched Max Duggan do it. You've watched Hendon Hooker do it. You've watched all of these guys shoulder that load. JJ hasn't had to do that. And that's my biggest question mark. And to your point, I think if Ohio State comes out smoking the way that I think they can defensively, you're going to have to see that in Columbus on Thanksgiving weekend.
And that's the one scenario that I think all of us are wondering about, is like, we watched CJ Stroud on the road against Penn State, had to have a great fourth quarter. It's exactly what he did. I mean, that was a clinic in offensive football and just connecting with your guys. We watched also with Ohio State when they were playing Iowa, like that game was sticky in the third quarter. And then they really started to put 4 consecutive touchdown drives together. So I'm totally there with you. This is a Michigan team that's been really good in the second half, but they haven't had a game that went into the fourth quarter where they really had to pull away. And this is the one scenario that I could see that would be probably the worst scenario for Michigan. Is I think that their secondary has given up some plays and one-on-ones. And if Ohio State can put together a couple of those type of drives early on in the game, that's going to take them out of what they do. Because Michigan, at least in these games where the first half hasn't been explosive, it's been a close first half, but we haven't really seen them have to like come from a 2 touchdown deficit and really make those plays. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, because if Ohio State can't stop Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards and CJ Stokes and some of these other guys that they have toting the rock, and this ain't going to be the conversation. Like, that's something that has to happen. It's job number one. And Ohio State's been much better at stopping the run, but let's not pretend they face a rushing attack like what Michigan's going to roll out there. That's the only thing, is if their game plan cannot be executed the way that they have done it for all of these games, that's where you really start to ask the question. But it goes back to this idea that nobody's been able to stop them yet. So we haven't had to see that happen. It's a really unique spot. This is a team that I have a ton of respect for, and especially with the things that they were up against coming into the year. We talked about the defense, but you look offensively, like Jim Harbaugh was a guy who's sniffing around at the NFL, so you have to keep the offense together. JJ McCarthy, who's their starting quarterback right now, was banged up during the spring, and then he didn't have the job outright until, third week, fourth week of the season, or whatever the case was there. They have been masterful in the face of all of that. So I believe that this is a team that can withstand and endure. Just really, really intriguing, man, as we get to the final couple weeks here.
Yeah, it's just so hard too. Like I said, they're a true old school. Like even Georgia, they've shown a propensity to have to throw the football and win games in that manner, and they've done it. And they've done it in unique ways.
I mean,
like,
Stetson and Ladd and all those damn tight ends.
Yeah,
you go down the list on those guys.
They
have been
they got
explosive
tons of them
through there.
So it's just like that's my only question mark. And again, I agree with you. I got a ton of respect for the way Michigan's built it, because that's my type of football, man. Turn around, hand that bitch off, work off play action, freaking put people in binds all day long. You're the same way. You and I are both the same way. We would be old school football guys. If there's a brand, I'd have that bitch on head to toe every time I was watching it. Like, that's just I love it. It's the way the game was meant to be played. And I have a ton of respect for Michigan for going to do that. But again, in today's day and age, with all those special forces out there that are freaking just bombs away, got matchup problems all day long, you got to have a quarterback that can do that too.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying JJ can't. And I want to iterate that. I want to hit that point hard. I'm not saying he can't. I'm just saying he has not done it yet. And that's where we're going to find out how good this Michigan team can be. Right.
Yes. And again, this isn't just the Ohio State conversation, because we saw what they did to them last year, but we also saw when they got into the playoffs how that thing played out. Like, we're talking about, if this team is going to take it all the way, some of the things that we need to see out of them to do that. Get through these storylines. Kind of just want to rush through this because I'm tired of talking about the mess in the West. We got to talk about it because, it's our duty. But the rest race, there are 5 teams that are alive here at the end of the year. I made the joke when I was on Big Ten Network, but this is actually clearer than it was a week ago, because last week, all 7 teams in the West were still mathematically alive to make it to Indianapolis. But let me give you the scenarios here. So nobody controls their own destiny, and that's the most important thing to understand here. Nobody controls their own destiny. Illinois needs to win out. So all these teams need to win out, essentially, is what I'm getting at. But then they need something else to happen. So Illinois win out, and they need Purdue to lose. Purdue's got the easiest remaining schedule. They've got Northwestern and they've got Indiana. Then for Purdue to get there, they need to win out, and then they need an Iowa loss. And Iowa has, I believe, Minnesota coming up, and then they have Nebraska to end the season. So could stumble against Minnesota. Do not see them losing the game to Nebraska. So those are the 2 most likely, not most likely. Let me give you this third one. Iowa needs to win both games, and Illinois lost. So the Illinois loss is almost guaranteed this weekend against Michigan. But the win both games part is the one that gives you a little bit of pause with Minnesota coming up. Those are the 3 most likely scenarios to happen. Then you have Minnesota, who's still alive. So they need to win out. They need an Illinois loss, which is just about guaranteed, but they need a Purdue loss as well. And like I said, Purdue's remaining schedule is going to be difficult. And then Wisconsin's alive, but they need Illinois to lose their last 2, and they need Iowa to lose their last 2, and then they need a Purdue loss. So the most unlikely out of the teams that are alive. All this to say, we're going to get important games in the West for the last 2, and that should be the most exciting part. I'm getting up off of that because that's a bad spot. Last for our storylines before we get a little bit of a national picture and get out of here on some previews of the games. But Ohio State, Michigan, we talked about the collision course. There's still a game for either one of them in between that last one. Ohio State with Maryland coming up, and then Illinois is, I believe, going to the Big House for their matchup. How do you approach the game before the game?
I think both these teams just have to stay focused. They need to stay where they're at, because I think that there's, to your point, I think we've had some question marks with both these teams, and we'll see what they want to put out there. Obviously, I think there's probably going to be some type of strategy, not wanting to tip their cap of what they may or may not have been holding, something you brought up about Day for the game. But I think these are both games where these teams can go out and win this strictly on matchup ball personnel. So to me, they just have to come out, play disciplined, play consistent, get through this week healthy, and we'll see. I think we all are right, and nationally, not just even in the Big Ten, to have this game circled because of the implications it may or may not have on the big picture of the college football playoff. So just handle business, keep it moving, and that's the game. That's the game that everyone needs to be focusing on.
For sure. And like, for me, I'm totally there with you. Like, if, there's a tune up, so I expect Michigan to try to throw, and this is a secondary that's going to be challenging to throw it against for Illinois, but you have to do it. I think that's something they're going to want to tune up on. Also, I think if you can win this game against Illinois and Blake Corum only has to touch the ball 15 times, I think that's the best spot to be in. Because there was a point in that game where against Nebraska, he was moving a little bit gingerly. This is not to say that he's banged up. I'm not trying to insinuate anything, but the volume of carries that he's taken, you want him to be as fresh as possible and going on a road trip to Columbus. And you flip that over to the Ohio State side, they have to work on the run game still. But we talked about their running back situation. You're down to Dallin Hayden, a third string freshman. They had Xavier Johnson, who's a walk-on wide receiver, turn corner, turn kick returner, turn running back. Certainly a difficult spot for those guys to be in, but they need to get the work in. I think health is imperative for both these teams. I'm glad you brought that up, because either one of them wants to be as healthy as they can be to have the best shot, but also from being in that rivalry specifically, and you've played in huge games, you don't want to be the team who wins the big game and then there's the excuse of, oh, well, the other side wasn't fully healthy. You don't want anything to tarnish a win like that. So we want to see these teams at full strength, and I think these guys want to play each other at full strength as well.
100%, because I think that there's still a scenario where both these teams could sneak into the college football playoff.
There's a scenario for that. And I'm glad you brought up the college football playoff, because we'll get you our big picture and national perspective on things. The CFP rankings came out yesterday. Top four remains the same: UGA, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU. You got Tennessee sitting there on the outside looking in at number 5, as well as LSU at 6. And I've got to come clean on this LSU thing, because a couple weeks ago I was pretty fired up about them being as high as they were. It's a team that I've grown some respect for. Don't have to get too deep into it, but definitely the respect is there. USC sitting at 7. Their biggest obstacles, they haven't played any big games yet, and they got a couple coming up. They got UCLA, and they've got Notre Dame, who I think beats them at the end of the year.
3 ranks in a row.
Yeah, it's a hot
if
take
they make it to
boy.
the Pac-12. But
it's a hot take for
I like
boy.
it. I was thinking about the same thing. They can come out and run that bitch the way they have been.
That's what I'm telling you.
Problems.
They need to hit 220 rushing yards. Notre Dame doesn't, and they get a win. That's from the number crunching analytics old school guy, Joshua Perry. Analytics say 220. The old school guy says run the damn football. How about that? Alabama sitting there at 8, Clemson at 9, Utah at 10. Penn State sitting there at 11. Talked a lot about them on this show, but again, a lot of respect for that team. And then Illinois is out. It's going to be interesting here toward the end of the year, man. I think UGA's got a great shot to just run the table, and they're going to see LSU in the SEC championship, the one wild chaos scenario. So say LSU wins that. You got Tennessee over there in front of them. So it's kind of a blocker. It's kind of not. And Tennessee's only loss would have been to Georgia, and Georgia team would now have a loss, and LSU would have.
Tennessee beat LSU head to head. So
you got like the whole deal. So then what do? Do you get 3 SEC teams in there? Is the loser of Ohio State, Michigan on the outside looking in? What do you do with TCU? And are we sure that TCU is even going to win out with the way that they've gone through games? And this is not to knock TCU, because I think winning games is the most important thing, because we see a lot of teams lose games they're supposed to win. But those are the crazy scenarios that I'm not going to say I'm hoping for, but, I watch reality TV outside of football. I'm a drama-seeking guy when it comes to my consumption habits. So, that's something that would be interesting to see.
No doubt. We'll see. It's going to all work itself out. And there's a lot of interesting games. And I think that is the one ultimate trump card, start of the nuclear fallout, is if LSU beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, which they're going to need a lot to do it. But if that somehow happens, might have to fly a couple of them boys. They lost the NFL back in there from that Joe Burrow team, but we'll see. Yeah, they're gonna need Joe. All right, let's get into some big previews provided by Bet Rivers Sportsbook. I did not put the betting lines in here because we're running a little lean and mean this week. So let me see if I can't find you some of these. This is bad podcasting out of your boy, but give me the benefit of the doubt. Iowa, Minnesota, big game here. Minnesota favored by 3 points. This is one of the ones that's going to determine the West. What do you see out of either one of these teams? Because I personally think that Minnesota I think they could run away with this. Their style of ball isn't one where Iowa's going to have a ton of opportunities to take it away, because if they don't have to throw the freaking football, they're not going to do it. Yeah, this is pay attention to it if you want, because it's, basically a battle for the second place in the Big Ten. But I just haven't. Iowa's put the ball in the end zone a couple times the last few weeks. Like, good for them. I'm just still not sold on
they had 146 total yards of offense in their 24-10 win. over Wisconsin. So I mean, it tells you exactly what this team is. Like, if they can't take the football away, they can't play great special teams. And PJ Fleck is a guy who's bought in to the special teams game. I mean, it's a struggle for these guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just not, I agree with you. I think Minnesota's got a good chance at this one. They should, and they need to, to kind of put themselves in a situation to possibly get there. And like I said, everyone's kind of in the hunt there, like you highlighted. And I don't even know what half that shit meant, but we'll find out.
I was just reading lines. I don't know what the hell it means either. All right. You got Michigan hosting Illinois. Michigan is a 17.5-point favorite. You think they cover the number?
I think it's going to be weather depending. I don't know what the forecast is. I know it's kind of sloppy everywhere right now. Weather depending, I think they should do it. And that's not knocking this Illinois team. I just think it's going to be a battle of attrition again. And they've shown the propensity to put on some points at the end of in the second half as they just wear you down. It's hard. It's just body blows. Blake Corum's body blows.
That's what they're doing, man.
JJ can get some explosives here and there.
Yep.
I think it's going to be too much.
Yep. I'm totally there with you. And then we got Ohio State on the road going to Maryland. They're favored by 27.5. I think these are teams that in theory mirror each other. In terms of the offense and the weapons and what they do. This Maryland team has looked uncharacteristic these last 2 weeks, dude. Now I don't think they have enough in the tank right now. And it's a sad thing to say because I really was high on this Maryland team, but November, it just when the calendar turns, man, it gets tough for the Terps.
It's like, you gotta ship them boys down south or something, make sure they don't get a frost or something crazy like that. I mean, again, I'm looking forward to both Michigan and Ohio State doing what they need to do, continuing to build on what they did last week, both these teams, and just it's a collision course, man. Got a big circle on there wherever that collision course up at Columbus is going to take place. That's what I'm paying attention to. So these games are kind of non-factors for me. And if I'm a bettor, I'm staying away from them too. Big lines, you never know what's going to happen. Just stay away from them.
I'm totally there with you. And then Purdue hosts Northwestern. We got Wisconsin at Nebraska. So just a couple there for you. I just see the look of. I don't fucking know. Yeah, I'm not going to ask lose this one. I'm just putting it out, bro. If they lose this one, oh my god, bro. This is the wild part. Is like I have no buy-in for Purdue. Like I have no stakes in this team, but just watching them play puts me in a place emotionally that I don't like to get to. Like the face that you made when I said Purdue is like that encompasses my feelings 100% of the way.
Kills me, man. Kills me.
All right, let's get off of this. Before we get you out of here, wanted to ask you about your welcome to college moment, but what is the story of how you got to Penn State? What was the recruitment like? Where else were you looking? How long did it take you to pull the trigger? Like, walk me through it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really long, deep, big conversation with kind of everything that was going on up in State College at that point in time. But Coach Paterno and his staff did not recruit me. I was pretty much an SEC boy. I was relatively signed, sealed, delivered to Alabama. And then Bill O'Brien got the job at Penn State. My high school coach sat me down when I was a sophomore and I transferred to Fort Union Military Academy. He'd been there for 40 years, coached the likes of Eddie George, Chris Perry. A lot of NFL guys have come through there. So kind of an old school guy in the sense he made me sit down, write out schools that I wanted to attend, why I wanted to attend them. And then I had a list of things that I had to take on every college visit, academically, athletically, and then socially, what I wanted to get out of my experience. So I was comparing apples to apples. Right. And I followed it pretty strictly. And I had two parents who played Division I sports. So that helped too.
What sport your mom play?
My mom played volleyball.
And then was your dad a football or baseball guy?
Yeah, football. My dad played My dad went to Virginia. He played quarterback.
I did not know this.
Yeah, my mom played volleyball at Lehigh.
So how tall is your mom?
About 5'11".
Okay. My wife was supposed to play volleyball at Cincinnati, and then she broke her back when she was in high school and never played in college. I love volleyball. She was a great volleyball player, but wife is like 5'9". So she was, wasn't one of the trees, but you know, the gene pool is certainly an important part of the equation.
Exactly.
My mother is 6 foot tall, so I totally get it. Yeah.
There you go.
That's
There
how you grow these big
There you go.
Division I football players.
That's what they say. That's what they say. I'm not gonna say as far as selective breeding, but hey, whatever.
You give yourself the best chance.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I compared apples to apples. I actually had a guy who played for Coach O'Brien at Duke who was helping out in our post grad team. He coached our high school team the year before, helping out with our post grad team. Norman G played tight end down in Duke for Coach OB. And he said, "Hey man, I know you had Penn State on your list. I know you're kind of cut down to your 4 or 5 teams that you really wanted to focus on, but the guy that just got the job, you know, one of my credentials was obviously play in the NFL and play in a system that was going to prepare me for that." So
no doubt.
I wasn't out trying to collect offers. I was out, I guess, trying to collect the right offers. You know, who's going to put me in those situations. So got up there, you know, kind of looked at the whole situation and was like, hey, you know, the seniors on that 2012 team did a really good job keeping the glue together. And, you know, Coach O'Brien sold the whole, I just came from the Patriots. We're going to run that system verbatim, put you in a situation to drive the ship at 18. If you can come in and win the job in the summer, which I did. And, you know, that's kind of how I ended up there. It was a kind of a combination of falling in love with Penn State, the alumni, not being like a Penn Stater, because it's kind of weird. It's kind of cultish like that. Not being, you know, having people who were Penn Staters always hammering me, falling in love with that environment. And then, like I said, you know, from a football side, really checked all the boxes for me with Coach OB. So, yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there. That's kind of the cliff notes. And then, you know, the rest is what it is and how all that stuff unfolded. But
yeah, it's interesting mentioning the cultish mentality, because I grew up most of my life in Columbus, Ohio. We moved to Columbus when I was going into the 4th grade. I was like 9 years old. Before that, we lived in Toledo, which is like a true 50-50 city between Ohio State and Michigan. But both of my parents are from North Jersey, so they have no Ohio State connection. So when I started getting recruited, my perspective was Ohio State. My parents wanted me to have the best opportunity nationally to not play great football, but to get a great education. And my dad is an old school dude, and he is, I mirror him in a lot of ways. People tell me I'm an old soul, and it's like his influence on me 100%. So when I'm going through the recruiting process, and this is getting started as freshman to sophomore, my dad had me make the list. He was like, I want you to go into these programs. You need to ask coaches hard questions. You need to spend time with the academic counselors. Like, you need to know what you're going to get into and what you eventually want out of your academic and playing career. And so I did it. I was like you, I was very strict with it. But I was like, if I get an offer from Ohio State, I know that's where I want to go. It's a good school academically, but we're going to be able to compete for titles. But if I didn't go to Ohio State, the other schools I took visits to were Duke, Vanderbilt, Northwestern. Didn't get on campus at Notre Dame, but that was on my list. And then if the sanctions had come down on Ohio State and it was going to be a bad situation with the tattoo gate, I was going to go out to Stanford. So I was a guy whose perspective was that if I wasn't going to be on a national championship caliber team, I was going to make the most of that scholarship.
Go and get that degree.
Bro, I was going to be one of these douchebags out here that talks about the fact that they went to Stanford. Like, that was totally what I was going to do. And it ended up working out for me, obviously. And I am so glad that I made the decision that I made. But it's really interesting to get the background on the recruiting and what factors go into it. I think from both of our perspective, like, having parents that were engaged in our process and were actually like equipped to give us good advice is a big part of it. I think the other adults in our life too, like my high school football coach was phenomenal in facilitating the conversations that I needed to have. But it's really interesting hearing, because some cats will just, they'll tell you flat out, like, my 2 goals are to win a championship and play in the league. So they're looking at only Ohio State and Georgia and Bama and schools like that. And then you get other cats who are like, I just need the perfect fit, because I can get to where I want to go from wherever, as long as the fit is right and I can get developed. Super unique stuff.
Yeah, and that's you make great points. And like any kid who's listening, I don't know if we have any high school kids who are trying to get recruited, but it's a good exercise to do. And I tell all the kids that I coach high school ball at to do that. Set realistic goals, set realistic expectations, go somewhere where you're going to play, especially in today's day and age, and get the most out of it top to bottom, because what you're getting for free is very, very valuable in the long run.
A lot of value to it, man. I'll tell you what.
So
I'm glad I was not cutting my own damn checks, because this shit is expensive.
Telling you what now.
All right, buddy. This is always a pleasure. Some of the most fun that I get to have throughout the week. But this is the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network, sponsored by Bet Rivers, Christian Hackenberg, bringing the knowledge and the insight. It's great to sit here with an old school quarterback, because I feel like this is where you get into the nitty gritty of football. I'm merely Joshua Perry, who made a couple of tackles back in the day, and we'll be back with you a week from now.